Hello everyone. I'm really happy that you joined this live session this afternoon, and I'm overwhelmed by the large number of participants. And I'm really looking forward to talk about OpenDI, which is probably a very relevant project for making the European strategy for data happen. And I would like to talk about this European strategy for data and data in itself. So there are a lot of comparisons what data is for the future economy. So it's the new oil, it's the new gold, or whatever. I don't care. What we definitely all understand and where we are on the same page is that data is of value, and that there are a lot of data treasures hidden in companies and in ecosystems, and we should really use these data treasures jointly in more value creation, and this will form the future data economy in Europe. And this future data economy is mainly created by sharing data. So linking data sets, sharing data without regret, and staying in control over the flow of your data, so that everyone is really easy in sharing data, and we can really benefit all from sharing data. So the European Commission published the strategy for data, and the main aspect there is that it's all about the flow of data, and it's across sectors, and all the data sharing should take place on the base of the FAIR principles, and we have to talk about access, management, and use of data. Okay, so the main pillars of the European strategy for data are described in the first paragraph. So, the main goal is to increase the availability of large pools of data. Then, obviously, an infrastructure to use and exchange data shall be brought into place, and the Commission asks for appropriate governance mechanisms. Okay, I think we have some in place, and that is what I'm talking about today. Furthermore, the Commission thinks of funding and promoting 9 data spaces in key sectors which are already known, and which shall be further proliferated as they are a main pillar of the European economy. So from manufacturing, mobility, health, to finance, energy, and so on. Okay, well, my question would be how to realize this. What can we now really do in order to create this one European data space, and not having, like, again, 9 silos in separate data spaces? Okay, so my idea would be that we need a common design principle for data spaces. So these are all data spaces. Every data space contains data which are of value, and everyone wants to share and combine and manipulate data in order to create value. Okay, so obviously they have something in common. The International Data Spaces Association came up with a reference architecture, and we worked on this for 5 years now with more than 100 of companies and organizations from 20 countries. And we can provide an open reference architecture which can set the framework conditions for these data spaces, which is based on standards that we rely on, and that are written by institutions from all over the world which we are connected with. We will provide a trust framework and a scheme for data sharing, which empowers companies or ecosystems to set up these data spaces, and we coordinate operations for essential data sovereignty services which are needed to bring trust into these ecosystems, for example, digital identities or certification. With this in place, we can really speak of open distributed data ecosystems and marketplaces. So this will be a blueprint for this, ensuring data sovereignty for the creator or the originator of data, providing data provenance throughout the whole end-to-end data supply chain, audit-proof if requested, and definitely based on European values. So that is what we already have in place and what we want to distribute via OpenDI, for example. Okay, having a look at these data spaces. So what are data spaces? Where can we place them? I would like to give it a place in the whole architecture stack of digital ecosystems. So have a look at this view graph here. You see all the domains on the top of the picture. So they are at the end users of a digital ecosystem, and they need a certain infrastructure. So they need platforms and market-specific solutions. They need a data sharing layer, a data sharing infrastructure. They need a cloud or edge infrastructure, and they definitely need networks and devices. And when we are talking about data spaces, then we are talking about this very light blue layer in the architecture. When we're talking about Gaia X, for example, then we're talking about the cloud edge infrastructure. When we're talking about 5G, then we're talking about the network level at the bottom. And when we're talking about AI for EU, for example, then we are talking about the service platform layer on the top. So just to give it a place in today's economy. Well, let's talk about data spaces. Data spaces, they are the place to be. They are clean rooms for a prospering data economy. So you can very defined bring or access these data spaces, and then you are in these data spaces, you are sure that there's a certain governance in these data spaces. You can trustworthily manipulate data, share data, and create value with your partners in your ecosystems, and define, for example, usage constraints. So let's make a deep dive in, well, the view on data spaces. So the idea of a data space is to combine, to link all kinds of data endpoints. So when talking about the data space, we have to talk about data which is provided at completely different sources. So this data can be provisioned on an open data source, for example. They can be provisioned on a data marketplace, in an IoT cloud, or just from a sensor or a mobile device. And all these data endpoints, the sum of all these data endpoints, they create or define a data space. And this is one picture how such a data space can look like. And you see this is an industrial or manufacturing scenario. So there are a lot of different data endpoints, a lot of IT systems involved. And each of these items you can see on the picture is brought to this data space by a different company. So you see that this is the linking of data endpoints from a lot of partners in one ecosystem. And the data sources are really different. So we are talking about data streams, we are talking about just a data set, and completely different kinds of data, and each of these has a completely different value. Okay, so this is a data space. And now again, let's have a look at the European strategy for data. Obviously, there are at least 9 data spaces which shall be brought up. And we know that there will be a lot more data spaces out there. So a data space can be something very small. It can be also a closed shop idea. It can be a little bit bigger, so just a company and its ecosystem, and it can be a data space for a whole domain. And the idea behind data spaces is that the concept, the reference architecture, works for all these usage scenarios. So you are free to use the design principle, the reference architecture, for a very small data sharing scenario and for a very big one, for example, also for all these 9 data spaces in key sectors. What the core goal is, no silos. We do not want more silos. We want to eliminate the silos. We want to enlarge the data pool so that European data economy can use more data for better AI, for better insights and all of this. And we definitely have to foster cross-sectoral benefits. And what we proposed to all of you via OpenDI is to have a look at these design principles for data spaces so that we really can ensure data sovereignty within these data sharing scenarios. And we see that there are 3 main things that we have to take into consideration, where Sebastian Steinbus will go in detail later on. So the one thing is we have to really link every imaginable data endpoint. So we have to create endless connectivity. Then, when talking about data spaces and different IT systems, different companies, there's no longer, and this is good, no longer the man in the middle. So we are talking about federated approach. So there's no one who can provide the initial trust. There's no focal company anymore. So we have to talk about trust between different security domains, and we have to talk about really comprehensive security functions if needed. And you can decide what data sharing scenario you want to have. And then we have to come up with a governance for the data economy. So really talk about, okay, I share a valuable data set, and we have to talk about usage control and enforcement of usage control concepts. And this has to be brought into place. And our proposal is, via OpenDI and via other activities, to use the same design principle for data spaces in each of the named 9 data spaces, and also in future European projects, just suggesting, okay, have a look at this. Please shape your project, your platform, your data sharing scenario, whatever you do, according to this idea, so then you can be sure everything's in place, and you will really can use data sovereignty. So what I don't want to go into detail with this. You see the 3 main pillars of the design principles, and we try to match it. So this is derived from our reference architecture. We try to combine it or merge it with other concepts which are already known. For example, the 9 building blocks from InnoPay, and then you can come up with this idea. So when talking about data spaces, and talking about connectivity, okay, what do you have to take into consideration? You have to talk about metadata description. You have to talk about APIs on data exchange, for example, but you have also to talk about data standards and formats. And what you can see here on these levels is that some of these requirements are generic, so really domain agnostic. Then there are some domain-specific issues, and then really business case-specific issues. For example, when talking about the governance at the very right part of the view graph, so the IDS reference architecture is talking about the generic governance. Then we also include domain-specific governance models. For example, the asset administration shell in the manufacturing sector and other things, so that must be included. And then there are probably also things which are tackled by every company itself to be taken into consideration. So have a look at these design principles for data spaces. Then we can make sure, also in the European project, so for the representatives from the commissions in this call, let's take this as a fundamental design principle for future projects and data spaces, then we can really make sure that things are interoperable, and we can really benefit from the European data space. So let's build data spaces, and please, let's make life easy by using these common design principles. We think that IDS is a very good starting point. Let's discuss this further and learn, and via Open DEI project, we can really get in touch with a lot of projects, and we hope also with the Commission. I'm looking forward to this because, well, we all see the value in data sharing. Data sharing is better than playing alone, and I'm looking forward to this, and I'm looking forward to the question and answer later on. Thanks.
Lars, let me just ask you one question. Is it right that this understanding, when we were talking, or when we have talked throughout the last years, very much about data platforms, your argument is to come from data platforms to data spaces. It would be good to have all these data platforms not only focusing on interoperability, because this was done, I think, in the last years very much, but also about this data governance principles, because then between maybe different platforms within either one sector or within many sectors, we could come up with building data spaces and maybe pull out of these the real added value of data. Is this correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. I would just add that so I showed this three aspects of the design principle. So when talking about the platforms in the past, then we were mostly focusing on the left part, so connectivity and interoperability, and we were not talking too much about trust. Because when we're talking about combining two platforms, two IoT systems, whatever, then we have to talk about trust between platforms. And then the third is we really have to talk about the governance. So when the data sets, the asset data moves from one platform to another, from one company to another, then this data set is left alone. It's like if you have a kid and it drives with a bike in the street. So you must be really be sure that that your kid is resilient and that it can cope with any situation which may occur. And it's the same with data sets. So the data set is no longer bound to the platform, it moves. And so we have to talk about governance, usage control, and all of these issues.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And I will just come back to one question in the chat, because Mark Losch from the health sector asked if you could maybe just define very briefly the understanding of data sovereignty, that everyone knows, because this is the base what we are talking about. So maybe just one sentence on this.
Well, data sovereignty means that you, as an originator of the data, stay in control about the flow of the data and what happens through a whole supply chain, in the whole value creation chain. Today, it is often like this: data is provided somehow, and then so it is merged with other data sets, linked, and then applications are doing some manipulation on this data, and then an insight is produced, and then with this insight you can earn money. But very often the data provenance, so who was the originator of the data, who really contributed to this shared value creation, got lost. And data sovereignty is the opportunity to change this situation, so to define, okay, who delivered which part of the value in such a data sharing ecosystem, and to make sure that you can decide who may do what with my data set, and perhaps there are some restrictions, constraints, or whatever.
Perfect. Thank you very much.